Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining Get Counted 2020 Census Event. I'm so excited to be having this conversation because the census impacts all of us. So it's extremely important that we understand what it is and how we can get engaged with it and what is at stake for Minnesotans. The census determines political representation and shapes how billions of dollars in federal funding is distributed to states and local communities every year around housing, education, healthcare, and so many other areas that affect our daily lives. Once the census count is completed, the Census Bureau will send redistricting count to states. This information is then used to redraw legislative districts based on population changes. In the last census in 2010, we were very close to losing a seat in Congress, and we are in the same position this year. In order to make sure that doesn't happen, we need to ensure that our children, renters, immigrants, refugees, and our homeless population and all of our other historically undercounted communities are counted. And this is how we get greater representation in Congress and how we ensure we get the funding and resources we need to continue to build our communities. However, this census, we have had some major setbacks. With the changes to the census timeline and operation, the Trump administration continues for ways to scare our communities out of counting themselves, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the uprisings. We have faced a tremendous amount of challenges, yet our census advocates at all levels in Minnesota have fought to ensure that all Minnesotans are counted. In Congress, I have continued to fight for the census to be fully funded and to ensure a complete count. I've co-sponsored the Fair and Accurate Census Act, which would appropriate additional funding for census efforts during COVID-19 and would extend the statutory deadlines for apportionment and redistricting data to give the Census Bureau enough time to count all of our communities. It would also require the Bureau to send monthly status reports to Congress, ensuring these extra resources we are using, these extra resources that they have are used as intended. At the beginning of September, I signed onto a delegation letter to the Census Bureau and the United States Department of Commerce to extend the census operation deadline back to the previous date of October 31st. Currently, Minnesota is ranked 11th in the country. This includes self-respond, online, phone, and mail, and non-respond follow-up. Previously, Minnesota was number one due to our high self-response rate, 74%. But unfortunately, our non-response follow-up is at 23.5%, while the nation's average is at 29.6%. Our goal is to have 100% count in Minnesota. That is what we should all be striving for, and that is why we are here today with census advocates that have been working tirelessly in our community to ensure we have a complete count. We have XP Lee with the Minnesota Council on Foundations, Monica Hurtado with Voices for Racial Justice, and Fartun Wali with Isuwan, who are all joining us virtually. Thank you all for taking some time out of your evening today to have a conversation with our community. I would love for all of you to introduce yourselves, to share more about the census work you have been doing and how those things are going recently. So we'll start with XP. Welcome.
Thank you, Representative Omar. So my name is XP Lee. I am program manager with Minnesota Council on Foundations. And my chief project is the Minnesota Census Mobilization Partnership. And we have been working to ensure an equitable and fair and complete count of all Minnesotans, for the last few years here. I think we started our first conversations back in 2015. And so we're really proud of the work that we've done so far. We look forward to being able to get as many as we can that haven't responded yet in these next couple of days here. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it tonight.
Thank you. Monica?
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm having issues with my today. So, Monica Maria Hurtado. I am a community organizer with Voices for Racial Justice, and we join the efforts of many in the show. And we have been in a long journey, coming from being very skeptical about the work and fearful about engaging our communities of color and indigenous on the census. And we joined the Minnesota Census Mobilizing Partnership, and with them, we have been people across the state who are part of the historically undercounted communities. So people of color, indigenous, people experiencing homelessness, people working with children. Now, from can you hear me well? From being very skeptical, now Voices for Racial Justice is talking about Census Day and night, and with all partners, and trying to do all we can to make sure our communities are counted. So that's about work.
Thank you. Fartun?
Fartun?
You're muted, Fartun.
That's the new thing, you're muted. So thank you so much, Omar, for hosting us. My name is Fartun Wali. I'm Somali American. I lead an organization called Isurun. It's focused on Somali women and their children, their families, including men. Our goal is to really help out of poverty on our families, and they're first generation of immigrants, multi-generation, and our focus is upward mobility. And we found out that the census had everything to do with why inequity exists in our community and communities of color. And so there's so much scarcity, as you know, there aren't enough resources for people of color and indigenous. And 2 years ago, when we got involved about the census of the co-creation table, we got training, and every question that we didn't have answer why inequity existed in the communities of color in Minnesota was due to the census. For example, Minnesota data, demographics show that are 45 or 50,000 Somalis in Minnesota. We know that's not true. Probably, Omar, you know more than 50,000 Somalis, or we know there exist many of them here. So the census is so critical. There's so much scarcity, whether it's healthcare, whether it is the infant mortality rate of women of color and indigenous women. We are now breathing and doing everything impossible possible to count our families and our children and our elders. So I wish that, you could extend, but that's our wish and your work.
We will continue to push that. I do want to say we were going to have Shelly Diaz with the Millie Lax Band of Ojibwe join us as well. Hopefully they might be able to, but I know that the indigenous community of Minnesota is also working really hard, and it's going to be important for us to make sure all of our underserved communities have a fair count. And so with that, I'm wondering if you all can share how you or your organization has been working with the community to ensure a complete and accurate count. Maybe we'll start with Fortun.
Oh, okay, thanks. So how actually was us getting educated? I came 2010 and I wasn't counted 2010, and there are many of us. So first was really thanks to the co-creation table. We learned what the census is, why it's so important. And from there, it was all about educating our families and our community, knowing that being counted and a deadline, it's not the number one priority. Number one priority is how do I feed my family and how do I stay safe? And so the inequity is creating so much of a scarcity for our families. So was training families and saying the reason that your kid is struggling in education, the reason that we don't have enough teachers of color is because we've been told this much of us exists when we know average family size of our community is 7, and there are many of us that came after 2010. So really went into hand in hand every service that we do, whether it is of the services we do and working with the community. And when it came down to collecting and doing the census, then the COVID-19 hit. So what we have done, use every avenue we can. Our elders will call and we do through FaceTime. They're walking and we do it. And so we have every one of us, 16 staff that we have, every one of us trained to do the census, any point, any shape, even calling, someone will call about other services and say, did you do the census? And if they say no, we'll say, wait, give us 5 minutes and we do it. So it's really hands-on, on the ground and everywhere. Opportunities to do it was really great, and we have to get more time.
What about you, XB?
Yes. So MCF and the mobilization partnership, we didn't work directly on the ground with community members. So what our approach is to be able to bring the organizations that had that connection, that were the trusted messengers together. And so Fortune had alluded to it a little bit when she mentioned the co-creation table. Early on, a couple years ago, we recruited a group of organizations that represented historically undercounted communities throughout the state to come together to be a part of this co-creation table. And it was those organizations that came together to create our Minnesota Census mobilization and engagement strategy. And this was going to be our it is our relational organizing based approach, which centered these organizations in peer-to-peer relational organizing strategies and techniques. Unfortunately, obviously, coronavirus and COVID-19 threw a big wrench into those plans. But they've been able to adjust. We've been able to change our engagement tactics. They've all done a really, really fantastic job. They're all super committed. And along with those groups, we were able to add engagement hubs in the nonprofit sector. So engaging other nonprofits with the help of the MCN, Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. Also greater rural Minnesota foundations in their own hub with the help of Neil Ritchie from Main Street Project. We're able to support all the work in our different CCCs that were created, almost nearly 300 various CCCs throughout the state. And we were able to get them some funds through the Minneapolis Foundation, as well as with support from the State Demographic Center. And then last but definitely not least, our tribal nations. We were able to engage in partnership with the Native Governance Center and with the help of our coordinator, who unfortunately was not able to join us tonight, Shelly Diaz. So it was through these hubs that we are able to really try to drive the message and the connection from the national level all the way down to the ground level. So that was our approach, and it's been a wonderful experience, a learning experience. It's been challenged and overcome a lot of obstacles in 2020, and we look forward to the capacity that we built this far, continuing and building on top of it, moving into the future.
So I'm assuming I'll be next. Fingers crossed with my connection. Let me know when I start cutting off, please. It's hard to talk when that happens, but I'll try. So part of the things that XP shared, we started being part of the co-creators table in 2018, educating ourselves, and we went out through that process to talk with our own communities, and we were people from 15 different organizations, and we were having conversations about what is the meaning of census for our people of color and indigenous and the other historically under. And after learning and seeing how critical the being counted was, we developed and with that communication plan, we started going everywhere. We were able to do presentations about, okay, this is what is at stake. And I always share the story of my neighborhood. I live in North Minneapolis, and that's part of why my internet connection is so unstable, because of the whole situations of North Minneapolis. But when I've heard the story of North Minneapolis having 7,000 less people in 20. Sorry, I think I cut it there, but I'm back. So how losing 7,000 people in North Minneapolis, that we didn't get $106 million in what to do. I think I was frozen again. But I'll leave it short. And instead of having the three city council members representing us at the city of Minneapolis, we ended because of the loss in. That's what has been what we have been doing, going around presenting that information to understand it to be counted. So I will leave it there because my connection is so unstable. So
no, thank you for that, Monica. I think that's an important piece, right? We don't only lose representation in local government or state or even federally, but when a community is undercounted, it loses millions of dollars that it can be used for investment in that community. And as Fortune said earlier, it impacts your educational outcome. It impacts the health outcome of that community, and it certainly impacts our ability to negotiate, right, for those resources for our community. If we can't say that there is, this many number of people in this particular community of this ethnicity of whatever, we can't adequately ask for a proper investment to be centered in supporting that community or that group. And so then people ask the question, if that is clearly understood, why aren't people signing up? And there is no easy answer. And so there are a lot of barriers in Minnesota. And I'm wondering, maybe we'll start with Fortun and work our way back up. If you can tell us, what are some of the barriers that exist for Minnesotans that has contributed to us not getting a fair and adequate account? A fair and accurate account.
So that's a great question. So we already know, today I was at a conference call where a specific county in Minnesota had a wealth gap of a Caucasian family versus a person of color, almost 50% higher income. And also the data showed female household led that tend to be in poverty. Now coronavirus is challenging. So when someone or a family already have been living in low socioeconomic issue and they're in survival mode, the last thing that you really want to think about is, I need to be counted. So we serve so many families, they want to do it, but by the time they show up, they're in a crisis mode. So if someone is in a survival mode, it's really what's on that one is on their radar at this point. So the challenges are challenges of inequity, and inequity is caused because resources that was designed for, say, 50,000 individuals are now shared by 150 or 200,000. So it's really what is the reasons, like our families are already undercounted and there are no resources. Yeah, and it's a kind of a cycle. So what we are doing right now, and I'm so grateful and so proud of Monica and XP and on a creative table of communities of color. There is a huge movement that is happening that we want to make our families and the census not 10 every 10 years. And the second thing I would say is communities of color, indigenous people who have been here before we came, have been undercounted for so many years. And so census was never designed to support person of color or someone with low socioeconomic issues. So we all know poverty and inequity is case, and plus the language barrier, and plus everything else that we know that coronavirus had done. And so it's really, we know what the problems are right now is to say, why don't we make census, counting census every year? Why can't we make census when we're paying the tax? Why can't we do census every other year, every year? If we're trying to address the inequity of communities of color and indigenous, census has to be less than 10 years. We also need to look at upward mobility in poverty. And certainly this year, we don't want to lose the city council, nor a congressperson, nor any representation, because we're already underserved. So we're going to work harder for next 5 days. But the journey really to support our families and do the census is one that looks like a kind of hopeless, but there's so much hope that we're going to continue this work.
Monica, what are some of the barriers?
Some of the barriers. So just clarifying. I think, let me be blunt, I think it's a structural racism. I think the system was designed to make us invisible. If we don't exist, the system doesn't need to deal with us. So we have encountered this at many levels, and we have trying to deal with every single barrier we have encountered, and and there's something new. If just we think of the issue of having the conversation about having a citizenship question in the census, thanks to the organizers of this country that fought strong against that, we don't have that. But our communities of color and indigenous communities are so fearful of systems, and that has only been getting worse and deepening and deepening. And that has been the main issue since we started in 2018. Me, myself, I was not feeling comfortable with telling an undocumented person to fill out the census out of fear that that person was going to be in trouble later on by sharing information. I had to educate myself, but not everybody has that opportunity. So the distrust that is part of the building of this nation, meaning the distrust that mainstream systems have created to be able to suppress the vote, to not deal with our basic needs, not seeing us as a whole. All that has been piling up, and if you add to all the problems that we were having, then COVID, and then the civil unrest, and then what Aspartun was saying, you talk about the census and people are thinking about the day, how to make their lives that day, that week, that month. Census is not something that is appealing to our community as long as, so that's why our job has been make the census relevant. Why, if we don't count now for the next COVID, for the next civil unrest, for the housing crisis that we all are seeing around us, we need to know many are to be able to get the resources we deserve, because we pay taxes. So to get the resources we deserve, and to understand that no, invisible no more. We have the right for a good life. We work very hard. So that is what I will say, that language barriers is in addition to the distrust, people not understanding why, every time I go to a clinic or a government, they ask me for this information, why what I need to share my information again. People not connecting that the policies we discuss at the legislature every single year are defined by the number of people we are. So it's in a way, it's very complicated system, and is boring for people to understand all the nuances. So I think that has been one of the main barriers we have been dealing with. So I took advantage that my connection was going well, and I talked a little bit more. Sorry.
No. Is that it? Did you have more to add?
I can talk. We all here can talk about the census all day and night. So
we do want, right, to demystify talking about the census for people, and we want just the ways in which we talk about politics and make people understand that politics is personal. We want people to understand that the census is personal. It will have an impact on you, on your children, on your parents, on your neighbors, on everybody that you know and you care about. And so yeah, no, thank you for talking. XB, what barriers have you noticed as the organization really that is, as somebody who's part of an organization that's leading the charge in mobilizing and activating these communities to work together to count one another?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the answer again, as you've heard from Fortune and Monica. It's super complicated, and there's so many layers. But let me just focus in on a word that is used a lot in terms of voting, right? And the word is disenfranchisement, right? So imagine as hard as it is to get people to just vote, and voting. I've said this before. Voting is like the rock star of the democratic process. Everybody can identify with their own like favorite elected official, and there's a lot of like passion, and there's a lot of show, and it gets a lot of coverage, right? But census is like the nerdy tech person in the background that doesn't get as much of that glory, but actually does
it's the muscle. Ayanna Pressley says is the elbow of the campaign, right, of the candidate.
Yes.
It's what does allow for there to be candidates, for there to be representation.
Yeah. And so census data is the base, data that informs pretty much everything else in the country in terms of population, demographics, right, including race and income, and just there's a lot of other numbers, and obviously the two main ones are apportionment of tax dollars and representation, and so it just comes back to just not enough people understand it, and it's a little bit more harder to understand than voting, just because there hasn't been enough awareness around it. So as hard as it is to get people to vote, it's the same barriers exist with getting people to understand the importance of completing their 2020 census, and sending it back, and then it was already going to be a tough year because we knew the Census Bureau was underfunded coming into 2020, and there was already going to be some legal battles, and then you throw in COVID-19, and you throw in all of the disasters and social issues that we've had to face this year. So it's definitely been a unprecedented year. But like we've said before, we've been able to, fortunately, earlier in before 2020, 2018, 2019, like we had talked about earlier, our organizations, our partnership really was able to build that commitment to the count, and we all realized how important it was for the next 10 years, of resources and representation, and not just public dollars, but also private dollars, because across all sectors, again, businesses, healthcare organizations, financial institutions, private, businesses, large and small, they also look at census data to be able to drive their growth and their expansion, into our communities. So those are dollars that we don't have a lot of information on as well, because we it's just isn't tracked as much as public dollars. But so we might be missing out on investments like hospitals, banking institutions, shopping centers, and other things, if we don't get an accurate count. So yeah, some of those are just a little bit of the barriers that we face, but it's definitely tough.
I know one of the barriers that all of you have talked about is the pandemic, the barrier that has created and how that has impacted. I also know that the change in timeline has also been a barrier, and so I'm wondering if you all can speak to how those two things combined together are making you fearful, the ways they're making you fearful about getting that accurate count. Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Monica, you start.
Yeah, I would say it's, I think we already mentioned some pieces about it. It was already hard. It was already, the distrust has been always there. Our people of color and indigenous, and especially people experiencing homelessness too, we knew they were going to be very difficult to count. So then we got COVID, and we had plans to go out, to have events, to have food, to have music, to join the multiple festivals in this, during the spring, and boom, we are inside home. And we are inside home, and not only that, but even just learning about that, we go to the civil unrest, and since then the situation of many of our brothers and sisters have been, the economic situation has been just even harder and harder. So we rely on internet. We rely on our connections now that we all are learning how to navigate this new digital organizing. And so I will say that the difficulty of keeping this at the focus when a media, people, you don't need to do any effort. You turn on, you are on the bus, you listen to the radio, you are on your car, you listen, and what you are hearing is all those narratives coming about the census is ending in July. Then we heard, oh no, it's ending in October. Oh no, now it's ending in September. And all this confusion making our stories and our narratives and our talking points changing the whole time. And on top of people being so concerned about, as I said, food, housing, healthcare, census, that happened. It was in April 1st. It's gone. No, it's not gone. It's something. It's going. And so this constant situation, and I think 2020 is a year that we will remember forever. I know I was going to remember 2020 because of April 1st was in our heads for the census, and now it's September 24th, and we are here still talking about the census, and we don't know yet if for sure it's ending on September 30th, which is the most likely, but still there's a slight chance that it's going to end in October 31st. So all of these uncertainties have been no doubt impacting our job, but also making us creative and innovative and using what we have at hands. And that's why we are having this panel now. Well, I'm assuming we could have this even in different conditions, but taking any chance, any opportunity we have. But yeah, we all have been, our plans, the grant money we apply for, we all have had to change all the plans we had and adapt because of all the changes that are happening with census is every day something.
I mean, I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic, but one thing is we've learned how to be flexible, I think. Fartun?
Well, I agree everything Monica said, and XP. I think the pandemic, we serve families, we serve mom and children in their families, and so we're trusted, and what we tell we want to stick to it. So what we know is that our families were, because the schools now have become, you have to stay home, and mom and dads are keeping kids at home. Mm-hmm. That's a new lifestyle that we didn't know. So people have to adjust to that. And sometimes when we say, can you do the census, people are looking at us like we're just telling them something that's out of their range. Some families are like, what are you talking about? I'm trying to keep my kids in school. I'm getting internet. I need to, do what I need to do. What you're talking about, they will tell us, and we're like, but this is so important. So this is something that is not benefiting right now, but it's something that we're talking about: education and voting and representation and economic contribution. And then also the coronavirus also, we know that it's really high rate of communities of color. So Native, African-American community, the Black community, the immigrant community, it hit it so hard. And we know the death toll or the data is showing that communities of color have been hit hard. So there's a fear of that, and there's fear of how do I survive today. But also, those are all the negative things, but the creativity of at least the immigrant communities that we serve is incredible. They have learned, we're oral society, and we've utilized every opportunity that we can to see each other. We're seeing our 70-year-old grandmas. We taught them how to do FaceTime, to check in. We're doing all WhatsApp. So now there's a Zoom going on. We're purchasing so many hotspots with the grants we have to make sure everyone has internet and connection. And so from the end of this, and making sure people are saying, there's so many of you, what are you doing here? That's what I'm hearing. And I'm like, what do you mean there's so many of you? I've been here 20 years. I've worked. What happens to my tax money? You're not giving me your tax money. So undercounted also, there's also racism, as Monica said. Those who are undercounted are contributing to this state and to this country. They're putting so much money in. Who's representing that money? How that money is coming back? So there's really an institutionally rigged system to make us not counted. But there's so much disparities, but there's so much opportunity moving forward as well.
XP, did you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I just wanted to maybe not too much, just highlight that I had mentioned earlier, we were getting ready and ramping up for a relational organizing campaign. So that was going to be our core strategy. Talking to people, mobilizing our trusted messengers, like Fartun and Monica and their organizations. And yes, COVID-19 definitely threw a wrench in that. And so we had to pivot to, virtual and social media outlets. And, as the restrictions led up, into the summer, then, there were, other opportunities for in-person interaction, smaller, obviously, but yeah, it definitely threw just a big wrench into our approach. But again, as you heard, everyone really adjusted as best as we could. And then a little bit to the point of the extension is that it definitely did help in terms of allowing us more time to work, to try to get more self-response. So that was a plus. But again, like based, unfortunately, due to just a chaotic scheduling and some partisanship, if you will, around the Census Bureau, then there was there is like the adjusted timelines that we have now, and it is unfortunate. We were looking forward to using up the whole extension, but we're doing what we can with the time that we have now.
I mean, I think the relational campaign makes me think back to 2000. I know Fortune wasn't in Minnesota, but I was one of those young people who was in Cedar Riverside and in Rochester and different places trying to get people to be counted. We would do that in the weekends. And I remember people being so afraid of what it means. And I just am so grateful that you all are able to do this work still, even though you don't have the ability to put people at ease with that, in-person conversation, because it would take us, at least a good 30 minutes to settle their nerves about what it meant for them to get counted, right? And how this was something that everybody can take part in, regardless of what their status was, and regardless of of their citizenship or anything else. And so I know that hello, Keith. I think a lot about some of the challenges we've talked about, and I know a lot of people automatically are thinking about these challenges being centered in an urban setting, right? When people think about, the Latino community or, the Hmong Asian community or the Somali East African community, automatically they think about Minneapolis and St. Paul. But we live right across the country. And there are a lot of challenges you spoke about as someone who lives in Minneapolis that I can identify with existing. And I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that exist for our rural folks who also need to get counted, who might even have a bigger barrier than some of the urban folks that someone like me has experience with?
And
how are you navigating it? What are the challenges and how are you navigating it?
Yeah. It's so sad that Shelly is not here, because Shelly is in the middle of the road, working with the Native community and getting the count. But it's in rural areas, the opportunity to do the self-response online, an issue, the opportunity to get access to the multiple resources that we have been able to build here, it's an issue. And so even the situation of the natives, based on what Shelly has been sharing with us, people in reservations not having a home address, they have a PO box. And when COVID started to be the situation, and the Census Bureau changed the plan, and part of the things that were supposed to happen, people are having access to paper questionnaires, for example, and being able to fill out those and to send those, that has not been happening. And we have been hearing about those things and seeing Shelly and many of the Native community trying their best, and still, till this day, if we see the census track in the north of the state where the Native community lives, it's
challenge?
That is a challenge.
Yeah. So our tribal nations definitely have been hit really hard with barriers. Like Monica said, so some of the issues are um, broadband, service. So internet connection. So Fartun had mentioned that a little bit. Obviously, COVID-19. Red Lake Nation actually completely closed off their borders, and so there was some negotiation and some engagement that had to be done to be able to get into Red Lake Nation to do some work with the community there, and that's still ongoing. What else? Some barriers in particular is just something that I learned was non-city style addresses. So like in towns, we have like a number and a street and zip code. Well, I think they still have zip codes, but there's not like an actual like similar address for some of these households out in some of the furthest rural areas. These addresses are served through a process called an update leave process, where census workers leave documents for these households to be able to respond to, and that process was put on hold due to COVID-19 for about 3 months, and so that really hurt their opportunity to self-respond early in the year. And something else that I was thinking of was I have to bring up Census Van from Circle Pines. So Circle Pines is just north of the metro, but in the last census in 2010, there's a threshold for certain infrastructure funding from the state, and that is that you needed to have a population number of at least 5,000 people. And so in the last 2010 census, they missed it by I forget, but just a little bit, and so they did. They weren't able to, show that they had over 5,000, and so they weren't able to access some funding that they needed for, some infrastructure improvement for the city. And so it's those types of infrastructure issues as well, that you can miss out on in greater and rural Minnesota if you're not showing enough numbers within your township or region or county.
Mm-hmm.
What I can say is we've learned a lot. Our refugees, St. Cloud and Faribault and surrounded area, they all work at the meat factory, meat factory companies, and they're working hard and they have large families. And so I get despair when I know all of the new refugees, less than 5 years, kids are not going to be counted and missing education and all that. So what I can say is we'll learn a lot from this crisis, and it's actually up to us as organizers and everyone and our elected officials to make sure census is no longer every 10 years. We cannot address our inequity and human rights of people of color, indigenous, by having every 10-year census. This was designed for non-ethnic groups, and it's up to us to change that and use what we've learned from this crisis and moving forward. Thank you.
So maybe I'll begin with you, Fortuna. I know our time is coming to an end, and I know a lot of us, right, are figuring out how to how to engage our communities in the most urgent way to have this complete and accurate count. I recently did a census event with Habon and the Somali TV and who is a city councilwoman in Maine, to urge the Somali community, all in Somali. You would have been proud of me, my Somali is getting. But
I am already anyway. Go ahead.
I feel like we're all still not doing enough, right? I know my office has been tabling. My campaign side is doing work. Like we're all just like losing our minds in trying to do everything that we can. Yeah. And so I'll start with you, and then we'll end with that. If you're comfortable, you can do this in Somali. I invite all of you to do this in another language than English, if you're comfortable. Yeah. But tell people, you take a minute, why they need to get counted, where they go if they have a question, and what is like a third thing that you need them to do in order for us to have the best 5 days possible for this count to happen.
Okay, so I'll say in Somali.
Okay.
Salam alaikum, Somali meel kasta ay joogtaan America, dadkan Minnesota. Sababta tirakoobku muhiim u tahay waa haddaan lagu ogeyn inaad magaalada degan tahay dhaqaalahaaga hoos u dhacay. Xagee aadaysaa my2020census.gov. haddaadan aqoonin meesha waxaad soo wacdaa ofisada communityga, ofiskeena soo wac, an waxaa soo wacdaa ofiska Ilhan Omar. Waa mahadsan tahay.
Pretty good. All right. Monica, we'll have you go next.
I'll do it in Spanish. Thank you for the opportunity, though. Saludos, comunidad. Aprovechando acá la oportunidad para dejarles saber que estamos a menos de una semana, 5 días de terminar el censo. La oportunidad de llenar el censo, sí, todavía se puede, hasta el 30 de septiembre. Vamos a contarnos si llenan el censo, por favor, déjenle saber a sus familiares, amigos, vecinos, pónganlo en las redes. Es muy importante que llenemos el censo. De eso depende nuestra visibilidad, que tengamos acceso a los recursos que necesitamos ahora después de este COVID. Por favor, vayan, son 5, 10 minutos, vayan a my2020census.gov. Por favor, pasen la voz, pasen la voz, pasen la voz. Thank you.
All right. XP.
Yes. Nhớ rằng cái tin đang trả lời Colombia ya không bỏ cô thọ này trả lời để hiện nay chỉ tao sáng nay opening của census nó đã khá đồ trong phu cái con này ông gam một đồ hot qua là si internet gam một đồ www.my20census na my 2020census.gov là si hút đầu từ số tông y plau pe sung awesome and đó là thà đồ cost census nó đồ khó khăn cái khó chẳng chính chấp lời đồ pe hai mong giờ là chỉ bảo từ pe mua bảo lý giá chế lấy sai nhẹ theo phải trồng phụ đồ pe chỉ giàu na so khăn ý khó chẳng chính giờ này từ sa đó là cái giống xe thọ ở chỗ này cái thọ này tụi này nó chính chỗ đầu nữ sư đó là tu thà hay sẽ là bắt đầu sa đó là chỉ to sa đó cái ba hai cái lời sa đó đồ pe sẽ na ở chỗ.
Well, thank you all for joining us. That was excellent. I love the signs of the diversity in language, and having everybody feel sort of represented. I wish we could do this for all the languages that are spoken in Minnesota. But again, I think what everybody said, if I were to sum it up in English,
is that
please go and get counted. Because if we are not being counted, we are leaving valuable resources that could be invested in our communities at the table. And so talk to your family, your cousins, your aunties, your uncles, your neighbors, that person that you see at the grocery store, the person who answers your inquiries when you call for help over the phone, everybody, and ask them if they have completed their census. If not, urge them to do that. We've got 5 more days. Let's get counted. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.